The crowd's hostile murmurs grew louder as Willa Foster clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming down her dust-stained face while she struggled to maintain her balance on the overcrowded boardwalk of Crimson Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1873. 6 months a widow and 7 months with child, the arithmetic of her situation had become the town's favorite scandal, whispered between church pews and shouted across saloon tables. Harlot. The word cut through the summer air like a whip, flung from the pursed lips of Eugenia Thornton, the banker's wife whose moral authority in town was as vast as her husband's coffers. My Preston wasn't even cold in his grave before you showed your true colors, another voice called out, belonging to her late husband's sister, Meredith. Willa's fingers tightened around the small paper bag containing the few supplies she could afford: a bit of flour, salt, and a precious tin of condensed milk. She'd ventured into town only out of desperate necessity, the small pantry in her homestead cabin having finally emptied after weeks of careful rationing. "Please," she whispered, though no one seemed interested in her pleas. "Preston was my husband, this is his child." "That's not what the dates say, Mrs. Foster." Eugenia pronounced the title with such venom that it might as well have been a curse. "Unless you're carrying the longest pregnancy in medical history." The crowd that had gathered began to close in, their judgment made all the more terrible by the faces she recognized: people who had dined at her table, who had clasped her hand in sympathy when Preston's horse had thrown him, breaking his neck instantly that terrible January day. Willa's breath came faster as panic set in. The baby kicked inside her as if sensing her distress. She took a step backward, her heel catching on the edge of the boardwalk. She teetered precariously, the small of her back exposed to a 3-foot drop to the muddy street below. Just as she felt herself falling, a strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. In the same motion, another arm came around her shoulders, drawing her against a solid chest that smelled of leather, horses, and the open prairie. "You're safe now," a deep voice said, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. The man stepped between Willa and her accusers, and she found herself looking up at a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh midday sun. Flynn Quinn tipped his hat back enough to reveal clear blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. His presence commanded immediate attention not just from his height or the strength evident in his broad shoulders, but from the quiet authority in his stance. The silver star pinned to his leather vest glinted in the sunlight. "This gathering looks mighty close to becoming a public disturbance," he said evenly, his hand still protectively on Willa's arm. "And I reckon the only thing being disturbed right now is a lady trying to buy her groceries." "Marshal Quinn," Eugenia Thornton huffed, her neck reddening above her high collar, "this is hardly a law enforcement matter, we're simply expressing our community standards." "Is that what you call it?" His voice remained calm, but carried an edge sharp enough to make several in the crowd step back. "Because from where I stand, it looks an awful lot like harassment. She's carrying another man's child," Meredith Preston hissed. "My brother's been dead 6 months, and she's about to drop a bastard that couldn't possibly be his." Willa flinched at the cruel words, but Flynn's hand on her arm tightened reassuringly. "Mrs. Preston," he said, "I understand you're still grieving your brother. But grief doesn't give you the right to spread accusations without proof. The proof is right there." Eugenia pointed at Willa's rounded belly. Flynn's jaw tightened. "Madam, unless you've been counting days on Mrs. Foster's personal calendar, I suggest you mind your own affairs." He turned slightly, addressing the crowd. "Now, I believe you all have places to be that aren't here." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse, though many continued to cast disapproving glances over their shoulders. Eugenia Thornton was the last to leave, her expression promising that this matter was far from settled. When they were finally alone on that section of the boardwalk, Flynn turned to Willa. "Are you all right, Mrs. Foster?" Willa realized she was trembling. "Yes, thank you, Marshal." She'd seen him around town since he'd arrived 3 months ago, but they'd never spoken. He'd come to Crimson Creek after the previous marshal had retired, and by then, Willa had already begun her self-imposed isolation at the small homestead Preston had left her. "Let me help you finish your shopping and escort you home," he offered, his voice gentler now that they were alone. "That's not necessary. I've already caused enough trouble. No trouble at all." His eyes dropped to her stomach. Besides, doesn't look like you should be making that 2-mile walk alone in this heat. Before she could protest further, he took the small paper bag from her hands. What else do you need? I can't accept. You're not accepting anything except common courtesy, Mrs. Foster. His smile transformed his serious face, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes. Now, what else was on your list? An hour later, Willa sat beside Flynn on the bench of his wagon as they made their way out of town. Beside her on the seat was a crate filled with more supplies than she'd been able to afford in months: coffee, sugar, beans, bacon, and even a small pouch of hard candies. I'll pay you back, she said firmly once they were clear of town. I don't accept charity. It's not charity. Consider it an advance against future payment. At her questioning look, he continued. I've been meaning to ask your late husband's place. It has that apple orchard, doesn't it? Yes, about 24 trees. Preston's father planted them. Well, I've got a powerful weakness for apple preserves. Come harvest time, maybe we could work out a trade. Willa studied his profile, trying to determine if this was just a kind deception. That's months away. I'm a patient man. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady plod of the horses' hooves on the dusty road. Why did you help me? She finally asked. Flynn's hands remained steady on the reins. Because it was right. Most people in town believe the worst. Most people in town don't know what it's like to be judged unfairly. He glanced at her. But I do. Something in his tone made her believe him, though she didn't press for details. They were nearing her homestead now, the small cabin coming into view nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, the young apple orchard to one side. It's not much, she said apologetically as he helped her down from the wagon. Looks like home to me. He carried the supplies inside, setting them on her small kitchen table. The cabin was modest but meticulously clean, with a few feminine touches: wildflowers in a jar, a patchwork quilt on the rocking chair that spoke of Willa's efforts to create warmth in her solitude. As he turned to leave, Willa caught his arm. Marshal Flynn, he corrected gently. Flynn, thank you not just for the supplies but for standing up for me when no one else would. His eyes held hers for a long moment. People talk a lot in small towns. Doesn't mean they know the truth. Would you like to know the truth? He shook his head. Only if you want to tell me. Willa took a deep breath. Preston and I had been trying for a baby for 3 years. Nothing happened. Then last fall, he hired a man to help with harvest. James Harker. Preston was away in Cheyenne for supplies when Harker. Her voice faltered, Flynn's expression darkened. He forced himself on you, she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I never told Preston, I was so ashamed. And then when I realized I was with child, I prayed it was somehow Preston's. When he died in January, everyone did the arithmetic and assumed I'd been unfaithful. Flynn gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I'm sorry that happened to you, Willa. No one deserves that. The worst part is that despite how this child came to be, I already love it. She placed a protective hand on her belly. Is that wrong of me? It's the most right thing I've ever heard. His voice was rough with emotion. That child is lucky to have you as its mother. After Flynn left, promising to check on her in a few days, Willa stood in her doorway watching his wagon disappear down the road. For the first time in months, she felt something other than fear and shame. It was small, fragile, like the first shoot of green after a long winter, but it was there nonetheless. Hope. True to his word, Flynn returned 3 days later, his wagon loaded with firewood. Noticed your pile was getting low, he said by way of explanation, already unloading the logs and stacking them neatly against the side of her cabin. You didn't have to do that, she protested, though the relief in her voice was evident. Chopping wood had become increasingly difficult as her pregnancy progressed. Consider it selfish, he replied with a smile. Can't have my future apple preserve supplier freezing this winter. Over the following weeks, Flynn became a regular visitor to the Foster homestead. Sometimes he brought small necessities: a new axe handle, nails for loose boards, but more often he simply brought his company, sitting with Willa on her small porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing as the summer stars appeared overhead. He told her about growing up in Boston, the son of an Irish immigrant and a schoolteacher, how he'd headed west after the war seeking something he couldn't quite name. He'd been a ranch hand, a scout, and finally a lawman. "And now you're in Crimson Creek," she said one evening as they shelled peas together. "It must seem very small after all your adventures." "Small can be good," he replied, his fingers working steadily. "Less noise, more clarity." In turn, Willa shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her journey west with her parents, meeting Preston when she was 18 and he 26, an established homesteader looking for a wife. "Did you love him?" Flynn asked, then immediately shook his head. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "No, it's all right." Willa considered the question. "I respected him. He was a good man, hardworking and honest. Love grew over time in its way." As August ripened into September, Willa's condition became more pronounced. Flynn insisted on coming by daily now, often bringing Dr. Thompson with him to check on her progress. "The baby's positioned well," the doctor told her after one examination. "Strong heartbeat, should be another few weeks." After the doctor left, Flynn lingered, repairing a loose floorboard Willa had been avoiding. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the baby comes?" he asked, his focus seemingly on his hammer and nails. "Keep on as I have been, I suppose," she replied, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "The orchard will need tending and I can sell preserves in town if—" She trailed off, both of them knowing the reception she would likely receive. Flynn set down his hammer. "Willa, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered at his serious tone. "What is it?" "James Harker is back in the territory." The blood drained from her face. "How do you know?" "Got word from the sheriff in Laramie. He's been asking about you." Flynn moved to her side, taking her trembling hands in his. "I won't let him near you or the baby, I promise you that." "He has no claim." "No, he doesn't," Flynn agreed firmly. "But men like that don't think about claims or rights, they think about possession." Willa withdrew her hands, moving to the window to stare out at her orchard, the apples now turning red among the green leaves. "I can't keep running, Flynn. This is my home, our home," she added, a hand on her belly. "I'm not suggesting you run." He came to stand behind her, close but not touching. "I'm suggesting you let me help you fight." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how near he was, how the late afternoon sun streaming through the window caught the golden flecks in his blue eyes. "Why would you do that? Why have you done any of this for me?" Flynn's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "Because from the moment I saw you standing against that crowd, I knew you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Because every time I'm with you, I feel like I've found that thing I couldn't name when I headed west." Because he stopped, swallowing hard. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Willa Foster." The confession hung in the air between them, as fragile and precious as spun glass. Willa's eyes filled with tears. "Flynn, I'm carrying another man's child, a child conceived in violence." "The whole town thinks I'm a— "The whole town is wrong," he interrupted gently. "And that child is yours, Willa. Yours to love, yours to raise. I'm not asking for anything now. I'm just telling you how I feel and that I'll be here for both of you in whatever way you need." He left soon after, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Willa stood at her door watching him go, one hand pressed to her lips where, just before leaving, he had placed the gentlest of kisses. The baby arrived 3 days later, in the middle of a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the small cabin. Flynn had insisted on staying, keeping vigil on her porch while Dr. Thompson attended to her inside. "It's a girl," the doctor announced as dawn broke, the storm finally subsiding. He placed the swaddled infant in Willa's arms, strong and healthy. Willa gazed down at her daughter's face, the tiny features still red and wrinkled from birth, and felt an overwhelming surge of love. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you, doctor." Thompson opened the door to the porch, where Flynn had dozed off in his chair. "Marshal Quinn, mother and child are doing well. You can come in now." Flynn entered hesitantly, his hat in his hands, his eyes immediately finding Willa in the bed. The tenderness in his expression as he looked at her and the baby made Willa's heart swell. "She's beautiful," he said softly, coming to stand beside the bed, "just like her mother." "Would you like to hold her?" Willa asked. Flynn looked startled, then honored. "I'd like that very much." Carefully, Willa transferred the sleeping infant to his arms. His large hands, capable of such strength, cradled the baby with extraordinary gentleness. The sight of this strong man holding her daughter with such care brought fresh tears to Willa's eyes. "What will you name her?" he asked, his voice hushed. "Hope," Willa replied without hesitation. Her name is Hope. 2 weeks after Hope's birth, when Willa was just beginning to regain her strength, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the window, she saw a group of riders coming toward the cabin, 5 men, with James Harker in the lead. Her blood ran cold. Flynn had ridden into town for supplies that morning. She was alone, grabbing Hope from her cradle. Willa moved to the cabinet where Preston had kept his revolver. She checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself by the window, her daughter clutched to her chest. The riders stopped in the yard. Harker dismounted, a smirk on his face that Willa remembered all too well. "Mrs. Foster," he called out, "I hear congratulations are in order." Willa remained silent, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard of the revolver. "I've come for what's mine," Harker continued, moving toward the porch. "Word is, you've got my child in there." "This child is mine," Willa called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "You have no claim here, Mr. Harker." "Is that so?" He laughed, an ugly sound that made Hope stir against her chest. "Way I see it, that's my blood, and a man has rights to his blood." "The only right you have is to leave my property immediately," Harker's face darkened. "Don't make this difficult, widow. I'm taking that baby, and if you're smart, you'll come along too. I've got land up north, need a woman to work it." "Take one more step and I'll shoot," Willa warned, raising the revolver so he could see it through the window. Harker paused, then grinned at his companions. "Look at that, boys, the lady thinks she can scare us off." He turned back to Willa. "You won't shoot, and even if you did, you'd never get all of us before we got to you." The distant sound of another horse approaching made all of them turn. Flynn appeared at the edge of the property, riding hard. He pulled his horse to a stop, dust billowing around him as he dismounted in one fluid motion, his rifle already in his hands. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deceptively calm as he approached. "This is private property and you don't look like you've been invited." Harker's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Marshal. It's a family matter." "Is that right?" Flynn moved to stand between the men and the cabin. "Because Mrs. Foster doesn't seem to consider you family." "That baby is mine," Harker insisted, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "I wouldn't," Flynn warned, his rifle aimed steadily at Harker's chest. "Now, I'm going to make this simple. You and your friends are going to get back on your horses and ride away. You're going to keep riding until you're out of the Wyoming Territory. If I ever see you within 50 miles of this place again, I'll arrest you for attempted kidnapping, assault, and whatever else I can think of." "You're outnumbered, Marshal," one of Harker's companions pointed out. "Maybe," Flynn acknowledged. "But Mrs. Foster has a clear shot at Harker from that window, and I guarantee I'll take at least 2 of you down before you get to me. Are those odds you want to play?" A tense silence fell over the yard. Willa kept the revolver trained on Harker, though her arms were beginning to tremble from the weight and the strain. Finally, Harker spat on the ground. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Flynn replied. "Because if you don't leave now, I'll kill you where you stand, and we both know I'd be justified." Something in Flynn's voice, the absolute certainty, the cold promise, seemed to finally penetrate Harker's bravado. He backed toward his horse, his eyes darting between Flynn and the window where Willa stood. "You'll regret this," he threatened as he mounted. "Only thing I regret is not being here when you first arrived," Flynn replied. "Now go." The men rode off, Harker throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder before they disappeared down the road. Flynn waited until they were out of sight before lowering his rifle and rushing to the cabin. Willa met him at the door, the revolver now set aside, hope still clutched to her chest. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands gentle on her shoulders as he searched her face. "We're fine," she assured him, though she couldn't stop the tears that began to fall now that the danger had passed. "You came back just in time. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. One of Harker's men must have been watching the cabin, waiting for me to leave." Flynn's jaw tightened with anger, but his touch remained gentle as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "They won't bother you again. How can you be sure?" "Because I'm not leaving you alone again." His eyes held hers, filled with determination and something deeper. "Willa, I know it's soon, and I know you've been through so much. I'm not asking you to love me back, not yet, but I'm asking you to let me stay, to let me protect you and hope." Willa looked down at her daughter, peacefully sleeping despite the recent danger, then back up at Flynn. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying I want to marry you, not just for protection, though that's part of it. I want to be a husband to you and a father to Hope." I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to watch hope grow up. I want to plant more apple trees and build this place into everything it can be." He took a deep breath. "I want a life with you, Willa Foster." Willa's heart pounded in her chest. "Flynn, I don't know if I can. You don't have to know now," he interrupted gently. "Just know that I love you, both of you, and that won't change no matter what you decide." 3 days later, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Willa sat on her porch swing with hope cradled in her arms. Flynn had kept his word, sleeping in the small barn every night since Harker's appearance, spending his days making repairs around the property and taking meals with Willa. They hadn't spoken further about his proposal, though Willa had thought of little else. Watching him now, splitting wood with efficient strokes, his shirt clinging to his back with honest sweat, she found herself imagining a future she hadn't dared to dream of before. She thought of Preston, of the quiet respect they'd shared. She thought of the violence that had led to Hope's conception and the miracle of love that had blossomed nonetheless. And she thought of Flynn, who had stepped between her and hatred, who had offered protection without demands, who looked at Hope with the same tenderness he showed Willa. Setting the swing in gentle motion, Willa made her decision. "Flynn," she called softly. He set down the axe immediately, coming to join her on the porch. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she smiled, patting the space beside her on the swing. When he sat, she carefully placed Hope in his arms. "I've been thinking about what you said." His blue eyes watched her steadily, hope and fear warring in their depths. "I can't promise that I love you the way you love me, not yet," she said honestly, "but I care for you deeply, I trust you, and I believe that love can grow as it did before." Flynn's breath caught. "Willa, are you saying?" "I'm saying yes, Flynn Quinn, yes, I'll marry you." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You won't regret it, Willa, I swear to you. I know I won't." She leaned forward, pressing her lips gently to his in a kiss that held the promise of all that was to come. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher, a simple ceremony in the yard of their homestead. Dr. Thompson and his wife stood as witnesses, and even a few brave souls from town attended, those who had never fully believed the whispers about Willa. That evening, after Hope had been fed and settled in her cradle, Willa and Flynn stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked softly. "Very," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I keep expecting to wake up and find this has all been a dream." "Not a dream." He kissed the top of her head. "Just the beginning." 1 year later, the apple orchard was heavy with fruit, the branches bending under the weight of a bountiful harvest. Flynn had expanded it, planting 20 new trees in the spring, with plans for more the following year. Willa moved among the trees, Hope toddling beside her, the little girl's chubby hands reaching for the bright red apples just beyond her grasp. "Here, little one," Willa said, lifting Hope so she could touch a particularly perfect specimen. "Isn't it beautiful, beautiful indeed?" Flynn's voice came from behind them. He approached, his arms laden with empty baskets for the harvest. Setting them down, he swooped Hope up into the air, making her squeal with delight. "And how's my favorite apple picker today, Papa?" Hope exclaimed, one of the few words in her growing vocabulary. The word still brought tears to Flynn's eyes every time he heard it. He'd formally adopted Hope 6 months earlier, though in his heart, she had been his daughter from the moment he'd first held her. "She's been asking for you all morning," Willa said, reaching up to brush a leaf from his hair. "She wants to help with the harvest." "Well, we can't disappoint her, can we?" Flynn set Hope on his shoulders, her little hands tangling in his hair to keep her balance. "I thought we'd start on the east side. Those wine saps are just about perfect." As they walked together through the orchard, Willa slipped her hand into Flynn's. "I have some news," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Flynn stopped, looking down at her with curiosity. "What kind of news?" "The kind that means Hope will have a little brother or sister come spring." For a moment, Flynn stood completely still, his eyes wide with wonder. Then, careful of Hope still perched on his shoulders, he pulled Willa into an embrace, his free arm tight around her waist. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her hair. "Dr. Thompson confirmed it yesterday while you were in town." Willa pulled back slightly to see his face. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." His voice was rough with emotion. Willa Quinn, you have made me the happiest man in the Wyoming Territory, possibly the entire United States, and you've given me more than I ever thought possible, she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. A home. A family, a future. Above them, Hope clapped her hands, delighted by her parents' display of affection even if she didn't understand its cause. Flynn laughed, reaching up to tickle her foot. What do you think, Hope? Ready to be a big sister? Hope's joyful babbling was answer enough. As the small family continued their walk through the orchard, the autumn sun warm on their faces, Willa thought of all the paths that had led to this moment, some dark and painful, others unexpected and bright with possibility. 2 years ago, she had stood alone against a town's condemnation, a widow carrying a secret shame. Now she walked hand in hand with a man who had taken that shame and transformed it into pride, who had looked at her and her daughter and seen not scandal but family. You're safe now, Flynn had told her that day on the boardwalk. Looking at him now, at the life they had built together, Willa knew those words had been not just a promise, but a prophecy, one that had been gloriously fulfilled.